The words were not shouted. They were dropped into the quiet air of my own kitchen like stones into a still pond, and the ripples are still spreading through my life. "You're just a burden now, Mom." He said it. My son. My Tyler. The boy whose scraped knees I had kissed and whose nightmares I had chased away in this very house. He said it with a casual finality, his eyes as cold and distant as a winter sky, and his wife Nancy stood beside him, a silent, smiling statue of confirmation. In that single brutal moment, the foundation of my world cracked. They thought my grief over losing my husband had made me weak, that my silence in the face of their slow invasion of my life was a sign of surrender. They thought I was a relic, a piece of furniture to be tolerated, until I could be moved to a more convenient, out-of-the-way storage facility. They didn't know that what they saw as weakness was just the quiet gathering of a storm. That night, after they had gone to sleep in the master bedroom that was once mine, I packed a single suitcase, and at midnight I walked out of the Houston home my husband and I had built. Not as a victim, but as a general leaving a temporary truce, ready to wage a war they never saw coming. It all started, as these slow-motion devastations so often do, with an act of love born from a place of profound loss. When my husband Frank passed away from a sudden heart attack, the silence in our sprawling Texas ranch house became a living entity. It was a constant, heavy companion that followed me from room to room, a suffocating blanket of grief. I was so lonely I thought my heart might just give up from the sheer weight of it. Tyler and Nancy, married for just over 2 years, were living in a cramped, overpriced apartment near the Galleria, perpetually complaining about the rent, their student loans, the impossibility of saving for a future. My mother's heart, still foolishly programmed to nurture and to fix, saw a solution that I believed would save us all. I would have company, the sound of life to fill the dreadful quiet. They would have a beautiful, spacious home, rent-free, a chance to get on their feet. I remember the day I offered it to them, my voice full of a hope that now tastes like ashes in my mouth. We were on the back porch, the one Frank and I had screened in ourselves, sipping iced tea against the humid Houston heat. "Why don't you two move in with me?" I'd say. "There's so much space here. It's too much for one old woman. You could save money. And I wouldn't have to be so alone." Nancy's eyes, a cool pale shade of green, had lit up with a speed that should have been a warning. "Oh, Margaret," she'd cooed, her voice a perfect performance of sweet reluctance. "We couldn't possibly impose on you like that. It's far too generous." Tyler, my son, my only child, had played his part with devastating skill. He'd wrapped an arm around my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a comfort then, but feels like a cage in retrospect. "Mom, are you sure? We don't want to be a burden." I had waved their protests away, so desperate to feel needed again, to fill the echoing silence of my life. "Nonsense," I'd said, my heart swelling with a misguided sense of purpose. "This house needs a family. It needs you." And so they came, with their moving boxes, and their hollow smiles, and their empty promises. "We'll take such good care of you, Mom," Tyler had sworn, kissing my cheek. I believed him. I wanted to believe him more than I had ever wanted anything. I thought I was inviting my family home, to heal together. I didn't realize I was simply opening the door to a pair of smiling invaders, who saw my grief as an opportunity, and my love as a resource to be plundered. The occupation of my home began not with a single battle, but with 1,000 small, quiet surrenders. The first thing to go was the wallpaper in the dining room. It was a soft, floral print that Frank and I had picked out together on a rare weekend away, a symbol of our shared life. I came home from a trip to Walmart one afternoon to find Nancy peeling it off in long, satisfying strips, a look of intense concentration on her face. "What do you think, Margaret?" she'd asked, not waiting for an answer. "I'm thinking a nice, sophisticated gray. It will make the room feel so much bigger and more modern." I felt a lump form in my throat. "But Frank and I chose that paper together," I'd whispered, the words feeling small and powerless. "I know," she'd said with a bright, dismissive smile, "and it was lovely for its time, But tastes change. We need to update the space to reflect all of us. All of us. That became their justification, their mantra for the slow, systematic erasure of my life from the walls of my own home. Next came the furniture, the sturdy, comfortable armchair, where Frank had read the paper every morning, was replaced by a sleek, low-slung leather thing that looked like it belonged in a corporate office lobby. The old one was just so worn out, Mom, Tyler had explained, his voice laced with a condescending pity. This one is Italian leather. It's an investment in the property. My collection of family photos on the mantelpiece, Tyler's school pictures, our wedding portrait, a faded photo of my own parents on their wedding day, were gradually taken down. We're just decluttering, Nancy would say, replacing them with a single, large abstract canvas of angry-looking red streaks. It creates a more sophisticated focal point. Every change felt like a small death, a quiet negation of my past. The injustice of it all began as a slow burn in my chest. This was my home, filled with the ghosts of my happiest memories, and they were exorcising them one by one, redecorating my life, as if it were a fixer-upper they had bought on the cheap. Even the food, the very heart of my role as a mother and homemaker, became a front in their campaign. My Sunday meatloaf, a recipe Tyler had once begged for, was now deemed too heavy and full of preservatives. My pot of morning grits was met with a lecture from Nancy about empty calories. They embarked on a series of ever-changing, expensive diets, filling the refrigerator with foods I didn't recognize and couldn't pronounce. The comforting smell of my home was replaced by the alien scent of steamed vegetables and simmering resentment. I was being made to feel like a relic in my own kitchen, my love and care dismissed as outdated and unhealthy. I found myself retreating more and more to my bedroom, the one space they had not yet conquered. I would sit on the edge of my bed, the bed I had shared with Frank for 4 decades, and listen to the sounds of my life being dismantled, the scrape of furniture being moved, the murmur of their voices, planning the next update, the confident, happy laughter that never included me. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that this was the price of not being alone, but the loneliness I felt then, surrounded by people who were actively erasing me, was 1,000 times more profound and painful than the quiet solitude I had known before. The subtle conquest of my home's decor was merely the prelude to a much more audacious and devastating campaign, the takeover of my finances. The maneuver was executed with the chilling precision of a corporate raid, all under the guise of loving, familial concern. They staged the intervention one evening at the new, uncomfortable dining table they had insisted on buying. Tyler had a laptop open and Nancy had a folder of my own bills spread out before her. "Mom," Tyler began, his voice a carefully calibrated instrument of solemnity, "we were just going through some of your paperwork, and honestly we're a little worried. It seems like a lot for you to manage on your own." Nancy chimed in, her voice a soft, persuasive murmur. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Margaret. What if you missed a payment? The penalties can be so steep. We think it would be so much easier if we helped you organize everything." My defenses immediately went up. Frank and I had been diligent savers. He had worked 2 jobs for years to ensure that I would be left financially secure, independent. My savings, my pension, they were my last bastion of autonomy, the one part of my life that was still unequivocally mine. "I've been managing my own finances for over 40 years, Tyler," I said, my voice tight. "I know what I'm doing." "Of course you do, Mom," he soothed, his tone so placating it felt like an insult. "No one is questioning your ability. This is about family helping family. It's about letting us take some of the burden off your shoulders so you can relax." They were masters of this emotional blackmail. They framed their power grab as an act of love, of filial duty. To refuse would be to seem suspicious, paranoid and ungrateful. It would mean starting a fight I was too weary to wage, and so, against every screaming instinct in my soul, I relented. The next day at the bank was a surreal out-of-body experience. Tyler, holding my elbow in a gesture of feigned support, did all the talking. He told the bank manager a beautifully crafted story about creating a consolidated family estate account to make things easier for his beloved mother. I signed the documents where he told me to, my signature feeling like a forgery of my own will. And just like that, the keys to my financial kingdom were in their hands. For the first few weeks, they maintained the illusion of responsibility. The utility bills were paid, but then the bank statements, which they started trying to intercept, began to reveal the truth. There were charges from high-end restaurants in downtown Houston. There were online shopping sprees for designer clothes. There was a weekend trip to Seattle that I only learned about through a photo Nancy posted on social media. I found a statement they had carelessly left on the kitchen counter and confronted Tyler, my hand shaking as I pointed to a charge for several $1,000s from an electronics store. A massive, wall-sized television now dominated the living room. "What is this, Tyler?" I asked. "It's an upgrade, Mom," he said, not even looking away from the screen. "An investment in the property. It increases the resale value for all of us." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. My life savings, the money Frank and I had scrimped and saved for our old age, was being used to invest in a house they were living in for free, and I was being told it was for my benefit. I was no longer a mother, I was a resource. I was the silent, involuntary backer of their increasingly extravagant lifestyle. The injustice of it was a constant, dull ache in my chest. I had given them my home, my trust, and now, my financial security. I was funding my own marginalization, paying for the very chains that were binding me, and they had the audacity to call it family. With my home redecorated to their tastes, and my finances under their control, Nancy began the final phase of her campaign. The complete and utter isolation of my spirit. She seemed to operate with the cold, calculating precision of a general, identifying and neutralizing every potential source of outside support I had. My friends, the women who had been my lifeline since Frank's death, were the first to be cut off. My weekly mahjong game with my best friend, Monica, and two other ladies was a sacred ritual. It was a few hours of laughter, shared stories, and a blessed respite from the escalating tension in my own home. "Mom," Nancy announced one Tuesday, her tone bright and non-negotiable, "Tyler and I have decided to start hosting a weekly dinner party for some of his work contacts. We'll be using the dining room on Wednesday nights, so you'll have to find another time for your little game." I was floored. "But Nancy, we've played on Wednesdays for almost 20 years, I protested weakly. "Well, times change," she replied with a dismissive shrug. "This is important for Tyler's career." It was a lie, of course. The dinner party happened exactly once, but its purpose was served. My mahjong game, my small circle of joy, was effectively disbanded. I was forced to make a series of humiliating phone calls to my friends, offering flimsy excuses that I knew they didn't believe. Monica, my dearest and most stubborn friend, was not so easily dissuaded. She knew something was deeply wrong. She kept calling, trying to make plans, but Nancy always had a new, more elaborate excuse ready. I would listen from my bedroom, a helpless prisoner, as Nancy's voice, a masterpiece of feigned concern, wove a tapestry of my supposed decline. "Oh, Monica, I'm so sorry Margaret is just not up to having visitors today. She's been so frail and tired." Or even more cruelly, "Her memory has been a little off lately. The doctor says it's best to keep her environment calm and not to overstimulate her." It was a diabolically brilliant strategy. She was not only cutting me off from my support system, but also actively constructing a narrative of my incompetence. She was discrediting me in advance, ensuring that if I ever did manage to cry for help, I would be dismissed as a confused, senile old woman. The world outside my front door became a distant, unattainable land. They had sold my car, claiming it was unsafe for me to drive, leaving me completely dependent on them for transportation, a service they rarely, if ever, provide. A trip to the Target for my own toiletries became a complex negotiation that usually ended with, "We'll try to get to it this weekend, Margaret." My world shrank until it was contained within the four walls of the house, and within those walls, I was an inmate. The loneliness was no longer a dull ache. It was a sharp, stabbing pain. It was the excruciating loneliness of being erased. While still breathing, they no longer bothered with the pretense of including me in their lives. They would talk over me, around me, about me as if I were a piece of furniture that happened to be breathing. Their cruelty became casual, a part of the daily routine. Tyler would helpfully explain the plot of a television show to me as if I were a child. Nancy would organize my bookshelf, donating books she deemed too old-fashioned. I was being infantilized and erased, my identity worn away by the constant daily friction of their disrespect. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the memories of a life they were systematically bulldozing to make way for their own opulent, empty future. The final battle of their initial conquest was for the house itself. It was the ultimate prize in their long strategic campaign. They staged the scene with their usual theatrical flair, sitting me down in the cold, uncomfortable living room one evening. Tyler had a thick folder of what looked like legal documents on the glass coffee table. Nancy sat beside me, her hand on my arm in a gesture that was meant to convey comfort, but felt like a restraint. "Mom," Tyler began, his voice a low, solemn drumbeat of feigned seriousness. "We've been speaking with an estate planning lawyer." The word estate hung in the air like a vulture circling. "He's made us aware of some significant risks. When you pass away, the government could take a huge portion of the house's value in taxes. Everything you and Dad worked so hard for could just be lost to probate." Nancy chimed in, her voice a soft, sympathetic whisper. "We don't want to see that happen, Margaret. We want to protect your legacy. We want to protect this home for the family." They wove a confusing, terrifying tapestry of legal jargon: inheritance tax, capital gains, revocable trusts, all designed to overwhelm and frighten me. I was tired. I was worn down by months of their psychological warfare. I didn't understand the intricacies of what they were saying, and that was precisely their plan. Then Tyler slid a document across the table. It was a quitclaim deed, the simplest and safest way to protect the asset, he said, his eyes meeting mine with a fraudulent sincerity that made my stomach turn, "is to transfer the deed into my name now. It's just a legal formality, a piece of paper. Nothing will change for you, of course. You will live here for the rest of your life. This will always be your home. This just protects it from the government. It's what Dad would have wanted. It's what Dad would have wanted." That was the dagger they had saved for last. They knew my deepest desire was to honor Frank's legacy, to protect what we had built together for our son. The thought that I might, through my inaction, fail him was more than I could bear. A small, rational voice screamed in the back of my mind. It told me to stop, to call a lawyer, to get an independent opinion, but I was so weary of the fight. A foolish, desperate part of me still wanted to believe that this was their clumsy, misguided way of taking care of me. "Are you sure this is necessary?" I asked, my voice a frail whisper. "I'm positive, Mom," he said, his expression unwavering. "This is to protect you." I reached for the pen they offered, my hand trembling, but as my fingers closed around it, something inside me, a deep, primal instinct for survival, took over. I thought of Frank, of his unwavering belief in my strength and intelligence. "You're a smart woman, Margaret," he used to say. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." I put the pen down. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Tyler and Nancy stared at me, their masks of concern shattering to reveal expressions of pure, unadulterated shock and frustration. "No," Tyler repeated, as if he had never heard the word before in his life. "I want my own lawyer to look at these papers first," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength I didn't know I possessed. The atmosphere in the room turned to ice. "Margaret, that's not necessary," Nancy said, her voice losing its sweetness and taking on a sharp, menacing edge. "We've already had it looked at." "Then you won't mind if my lawyer confirms that," I said, standing up on shaky legs. It was the first time in a year I had truly defied them, and the look of stunned fury on their faces was a small, bitter, and empowering victory. They had overplayed their hand, and in doing so, they had woken a sleeping giant. My refusal to sign the deed marked the end of the Cold War and the beginning of open hostility. The thin veneer of civility they had maintained was stripped away, revealing the raw, ugly greed and contempt that had been festering beneath the surface all along. I was no longer a person to be managed. I was an enemy to be conquered. The atmosphere in the Houston house became toxic, a suffocating brew of resentment and anger. They stopped speaking to me altogether, communicating only through slammed doors, heavy, pointed sighs, and the occasional muttered insult under their breath. As they passed me in the hallway, they began a campaign of petty psychological warfare, designed to make my life so miserable that I would either break down and sign the papers, or agree to be shipped off to a nursing home. They would accidentally lose they would forget to buy the few food items I had requested when they went to the store. They would blast their loud, thumping music at all hours of the night, knowing I was a light sleeper. It was a daily onslaught of small cruelties, each one designed to wear me down. The final explosive confrontation came over something so trivial, so meaningless, that its memory is almost absurd. I was in the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea. Tyler came storming in, his face a thundercloud. He had been looking for his car keys and couldn't find them. He had decided, for no logical reason, that I had moved them. "Where are they, Mom?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Where did you put my keys?" "I haven't seen your keys, Tyler," I said calmly. "I'm sure they're right where you left them." "No, you're always moving things, tidying up, putting things where they don't belong," he snarled, his anger escalating. "You're so forgetful. You probably thought they were yours and put them in your purse." The accusation, so baseless and insulting, was the final spark on a year's worth of dry tinder. "I did not touch your keys," I said, my voice rising with a strength that surprised us both. "And I am not forgetful. I am tired of being disrespected in my own home. I am tired of being treated like an inconvenience, like a child, like a ghost." Nancy came into the kitchen then, drawn by the raised voices. She immediately took Tyler's side. "Margaret, calm down," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're getting hysterical. It's just a set of keys." That's when I turned on her. "No, it is not just a set of keys. It is about respect. It is about the fact that you two have marched into my home, my life, and tried to erase. You have taken my money, my friends, my peace of mind, and you have the audacity to stand there and call me hysterical." That was the moment Tyler delivered the blow that would change everything. He stepped toward me, his face contorted into a mask of pure ugly rage that I didn't recognize as my son. "You want to talk about what we've taken?" he spat. "We have given you company. We have updated this dusty old house. We have given you a life, and all you do is complain. You're just a burden now, Mom. A weight we have to carry every single day. A burden." The word hung in the air, a final brutal verdict on my entire existence. My son, the boy I had carried, nursed, and loved with every fiber of my being, had just declared me a burden. In that moment, looking at his furious face and Nancy's smug smirk, I knew that whatever love I had left for him had died, and in its place, something cold and hard and unbreakable was beginning to form. "I raised you better than this, Tyler," was all I could whisper. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, surrounded by the ruins of the family I thought I had. The night after he called me a burden was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in the old rocking chair in my bedroom, the one Frank had bought for me when I was pregnant with Tyler, and I stared out at the dark, silent street. The house was quiet, but my mind was a raging storm. A burden, the word echoed, a relentless, torturous refrain. Every sacrifice I had ever made, every sleepless night, every meal I had cooked, every tear I had wiped away, all of it had been reduced to that one ugly word. The love I had poured into my son had not been a foundation for his life. It had become a weight he was tired of carrying. A profound, chilling clarity settled over me in those pre-dawn hours. The grief I felt was not for the loss of their affection that had been gone for a long time. It was for the loss of the illusion. The illusion that I had a son who loved me. The illusion that I was part of a family. That illusion was dead, and I was finally free from the desperate, exhausting work of trying to keep it alive. At midnight, I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate, devoid of the hesitation that had plagued me for the past year. I pulled my old sturdy suitcase from the top of the closet. I did not pack much. I took a few changes of clothes, my essential medications, and the small fireproof box that held the most important documents of my life. Inside was my birth certificate, Frank's death certificate, and the one thing that mattered more than anything else, the original unassailable deed to the house, with my name, Margaret Davis, as the sole legal owner. I also took a small framed photo of Frank and a bundle of his letters that I had kept hidden from Nancy's decluttering purges. I walked through the silent house one last time, a ghost, leaving her own haunt. I saw the ugly furniture they had bought with my money, the barren walls they had stripped of my memories. Then I walked out the front door, leaving my key on the kitchen counter, a silent, final statement. I didn't look back. I walked 3 blocks to a 24-hour diner, the cool Houston night air, a balm on my feverish skin. I sat in a booth, ordered a cup of black coffee, and made the most important phone call of my life. "Monica," I said, when my best friend answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I've left him. I've left them all." She was awake instantly. "Where are you, Margaret? I'm coming to get you." I stayed with Monica for a week, sleeping in her quiet guest room, planning my counter-offensive. She was my confidant, my general, my rock. Connected me with a lawyer she knew, a formidable woman named Ms. Albbright, who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for taking no prisoners.
Our first meeting was a revelation.
I laid out my story, my evidence, the deed, the bank statements I had secretly printed, a small notebook where I had documented every insult, every act of cruelty. Ms. Albbright listened, her expression growing colder with every word. When I finished, she looked at me with a mixture of professional outrage and personal empathy. "Margaret," she said, her voice like steel, "what they have done is not just a moral failing, it is a legal one. This is financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and illegal tenancy. We are not just going to get them out of your house, we are going to make them pay." Her words were a validation, a confirmation that I was not crazy, not hysterical, not bitter. I was a victim of a crime, and I was about to become a plaintiff. The plan Ms. Albbright formulated was brilliant in its simplicity and its brutality. "We are not going to file for a messy eviction," she explained. "That gives them time to fight, to delay. We are going to do something much cleaner. We are going to sell the house right out from under them." The audacity of it took my breath away. While they were living in their house, secure in their belief that they had won, I would be quietly, legally, and irrevocably liquidating their stolen kingdom. They had called me a bird. They were about to find out just how light they were without me holding them up. The execution of our plan required a level of stealth and deception that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I remained in hiding, living in a small, furnished apartment that Monica had helped me rent under her name. I became a ghost, erasing my own presence from the world so that I could orchestrate my return with maximum impact. Ms. Albbright hired a real estate agent who was a master of discretion. There would be no for sale sign on my lawn, no public open houses. The property would be shown by appointment only, marketed as a pocket listing to a select group of pre-qualified buyers. The agent's cover story was a work of genius. He presented himself to Tyler and Nancy as an appraiser from the bank, sent to conduct an evaluation for a potential home equity line of credit. They, blinded by their own greed and arrogance, bought it completely. They probably thought it was a brilliant idea to leverage their asset for even more cash. They proudly gave him a tour of the house, pointing out all the upgrades they had made with my money. The new kitchen countertops, the minimalist living room, the soulless gray wall. They were unwittingly acting as sales agents for their own downfall. I waited, my days a tense mixture of hope and fear. I spoke with Ms. Albbright daily, getting updates on the showings, on the legal preparations. It was a high-stakes game of chess, and every move had to be perfect. Meanwhile, Tyler and Nancy were living in blissful ignorance, though their lives were becoming increasingly stressful. Without my pension and savings to draw upon, their finances were in a tailspin. I had, with Ms. Albright's help, opened a new bank account and had my funds redirected. The joint accounts they had relied on were now empty. I imagined their confusion and anger as their credit cards were declined, as bounced check notices started to arrive. They called me, of course, dozens of times. "Mom, where are you? Something is wrong with the bank account. Mom, this isn't funny. We have bills to pay." I never answered. I let their panic fester in the silence. They had no idea that their financial woes were just the prelude to a much greater devastation. The offer for the house came faster than any of us had anticipated. A young family, relocating to Houston for a job at the medical center, fell in love with the house's solid structure and beautiful, large yard. They made a full cash offer, significantly over the asking price, and they wanted to close in 2 weeks. This was it, the point of no return. The closing was a quiet, surreal affair at Ms. Albright's office. I signed the documents, my hands surprisingly steady. The deed to my home, the physical embodiment of my life with Frank, was transferred to a new family. As the cashier's check was slid across the table, a number so large it seemed like a fiction, I felt a wave of profound, dizzying relief. I had done it. I had taken back everything. Now all that was left was for them to be notified of their defeat. We decided that the new owners would be the ones to deliver the news. It was cleaner, more final. They were not being evicted by a scorned mother. They were being displaced by the cold, hard reality of a legal property sale. The new family, the Jacksons, were scheduled to arrive with their moving truck at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I spent that night in my small apartment, sleepless, my mind replaying the events of the past year, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. At 9:15 a.m. on Saturday, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom." Tyler's voice was a raw, ragged shriek of pure, unadulterated panic. "What did you do?" "There's a moving truck in the driveway. A family is here with a deed. They're saying they bought the house." I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring his confusion, his terror. "I sold the house, Tyler," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. It was my house to sell. The sputtering, choked sound that came through the phone was the sound of a man's entire world collapsing. "You can't," Tyler shrieked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "This is our home. We live here." I could hear Nancy in the background, a high-pitched wail of pure hysteria. "No, dear," I said, my voice quiet, but edged with the steel I had discovered within myself. "You lived there, in my house, as my guests, and the party is over. The people on your porch are the new legal owners. They have a court-ordered notice for you to vacate the premises immediately. I suggest you comply. We'll sue you. We have rights," he blustered, his rage collapsing into impotent threat. "Actually, Tyler, you don't," I said, channeling Ms. Albright's calm authority. "You were tenants at will. You had no lease. You have no legal claim to the property. You have only what you came with, which, as I recall, wasn't you. You planned this," he whispered, the dawning horror in his voice the sweetest music I had ever heard. "You planned this whole thing while you were sitting right here. You called me a burden, Tyler," I said softly, twisting the knife just a little. "I decided to unburden you. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. I did not feel a rush of triumphant joy. I felt a profound, hollowing relief, like a fever had finally broken. The Queen had not just reclaimed her castle, she had sold it to the highest bidder and moved on. The aftermath, as gleefully reported to me by Monica, was a masterwork of public humiliation. The Jacksons, the new owners, had been kind but firm. The police were eventually called to supervise a peaceful transition of tenants. Tyler and Nancy were forced to frantically pack their designer clothes and minimalist furniture into a rented U-Haul, while the entire neighborhood watched from behind their curtain. Nancy apparently had a full-blown meltdown on the front lawn, screaming about my betrayal while Tyler just stood there, shell-shocked and defeated. Their kingdom, built on a foundation of my stolen money and their boundless arrogance, had been publicly dismantled in a single morning. They were forced to move into a cheap extended-stay motel on the outskirts of town, a place with stained carpets and the lingering smell of despair. The luxury SUV was repossessed. Their credit was ruined. They had tried to erase me, and in the end, they were the ones who had been rendered homeless and insignificant. They attempted to sue, of course. Their new cut-rate lawyer sent a blustering letter to Ms. Albbright, claiming emotional distress and seeking financial damages. Ms. Albbright responded with a concise, 2-page letter that not only outlined their complete lack of any legal standing, but also included a detailed accounting of the funds they had misappropriated from my accounts, along with a formal demand for repayment. We never heard from them again. As for me, I embarked on the quiet, joyful project of building a new life. With the proceeds from the sale, I was not just secure, I was wealthy. But the money was never the prize. The prize was the freedom it represented. I bought a beautiful, sun-drenched condominium in a quiet complex with a community garden and a library. It wasn't a large house, but every inch of it was mine. A space defined, not by my past, but by my future. The first thing I did was hang my family photos back on the walls. Not the curated, minimalist collection Nancy would have approved of, but a joyful, chaotic jumble of memories. Frank and me on our wedding day, Tyler as a gap-toothed little boy, my own parents, young and full of hope. I was reclaiming my history, piece by piece. I sit on my new balcony now, a cup of coffee, warming my hands, and I watch the sun rise over the Houston skyline. The air is warm and humid, filled with the promise of a new day. My life is small and beautiful, curated not by someone else's aesthetic, but by my own sense of peace. I don't think about Tyler and Nancy often. The anger has long since faded, replaced by a kind of weary, distant pity. They were so consumed by their own greed, so desperate for a life they felt they were owed, that they destroyed the one person who had ever truly loved them. It is a tragedy of their own making, and they will have to live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. A few months ago, I received a letter, forwarded from Monica. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. It was from Tyler. It was not an apology. It was a rambling, self-pitying account of his hardships. Nancy had left him. He was struggling to find work. His life was a mess. It ended with a single stunning sentence. "After everything, I think you owe it to me to help." I read the letter, and then I did something the old Margaret would never have done. I laughed, a real deep, genuine laugh. The sheer unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. I took the letter, walked over to the paper shredder Monica had given me as a housewarming gift, and I fed it into the machine. I watched as his words, his entitlement, his complete lack of self-awareness, were turned into a meaningless confetti of paper. My help, my love, my resources, they were no longer his to claim. I had found new places to invest my heart. I had established the Burden Fund, a small anonymous grant I administered through a local community center, providing emergency assistance to elderly parents who had been financially exploited by their children. My son's greatest insult had become my greatest legacy. My story is not one of revenge. Not really. It is a story of reclamation. It is the story of a woman who was told she was a burden and remembered she was the foundation. It is a story about the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing your own worth, even when those closest to you have forgotten it. I am not a victim, I am a survivor, and as I watch the morning light spill across my garden, I am filled with a profound and lasting peace. He called me a burden, but I was the one who was finally gloriously unburdened.